The following presentation of City Cinematheque is made possible, in part, by support from the American Scandinavian Foundation and the Norwegian Information Service in the United States. Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film at the City College of the City University of New York. Today we're going to be looking once again into contemporary Scandinavian cinema. We'll be seeing the 1995 production, winner of awards at Chicago and Montreal and Seattle. This film is titled Cross My Heart and Hope to Die, and it was directed by Marius Holst. If you like The 400 Blows or some of the more recent Scandinavian cinema, such as Twist and Shout or My Life as a Dog, this is the kind of film that will interest you. It's a touching and also quite innovative formally, stylistically, coming-of-age story, a story about what it means to grow up in the working class in Norway. We'll be talking about that and many of other things after today's screening. It's a pleasure to welcome to City Cinematheque once again our friend David Sterritt, film critic of the Christian Science Monitor. Now, take this opportunity to see something we don't see very often. Cross My Heart and Hope to Die. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've had enjoyed this opportunity to see the kind of film that I don't think is showcased as frequently as it should be. The kind of film that really suggests that there really is a rich international cinema out there, and maybe even from corners like Norway that we may not be thinking about very much. To talk about that topic and some of the features of this very interesting film itself, it's a pleasure to welcome back to City Cinematheque our friend David Sterritt. Many of our viewers know David as the film critic of the Christian Science Monitor. They probably also know that he's the author of recent books on both Hitchcock and just this year on Godard, and does happily stints of teaching at Columbia and Long Island University, where I'm sure he has many happy students. We're happy to have you here today, David.
Good to be here, Jerry.
Well, let's talk about this notion. Before we go on to the film itself, let's just sort of talk about the situation of, if I can use the phrase, of a kind of global independent cinema. I mean, if I use a phrase like that, what do you think I'm meaning by a phrase like that? And does it mean anything to you? Is it a useful phrase?
Oh, it certainly means a lot to me, and I think to anybody who looks at a lot of film from around the world. In fact, if we look at films from most of the smaller countries in the world, we no longer see, to the extent that we ever did, really individuated kinds of cinema. I think this first hit home with me, a very long time ago. It might have been as much as 20 years, when I attended a series of films from Iceland at the Museum of Modern Art. And I attended just this long list of films from Iceland, and I realized at the end that I had seen very little in the way of film style that struck me as being not only Icelandic,
right,
but not the sort of thing that you just kind of see all the time in regular movies. Of course, the people and the settings, and to some extent the stories, were in one way or another Icelandic.
Right.
And yet, in terms of film style, they were the sorts of movies that you would see from any number of countries around the globe. Now, of course, there are certain national cinemas that I think have a certain degree of individuation
right,
to them because of historical factors, because they're perhaps dominated by particular artists who have particular styles or points of view. And then, of course, there are always, everywhere, individual filmmakers who manage to strike out on their own path to create a truly distinctive kind of
right,
cinema, and to keep doing that that, even though the people around them may be doing something else. But I think that we really have been for a very long time in an age of true globalization in terms of cinema style, with all the exceptions that there are to that generality. Still, pretty much everywhere we go, we find certain things being done in cinema.
Right. Now, one of the things that interests me about this is the notion of perhaps two models that are operating there of a global cinema. And one a model is in a certain sense the most obvious one, and that is that of the so-called classical Hollywood style. If you're going to make a film and it's going to get into the international market, well, you make it in imitation of the way the Americans make films in a number of ways. And that's one model, and I must say that that's a model that is only infrequently successful when adopted by other nationalities, at least from my perspective. The other one is, I think, closer to this notion of a global cinema, that we now are 100 years later in cinema. Most places in the world that, that are even the industrialized cities of even under or mixed development countries have access in cinematheques or that kind of thing. So there's a large number of people who are carrying around in their mind, well, let me put it this way. I just read an article written by a Cuban critic who had just written a book on the spirituality of Andrei Tarkovsky and Krzysztof Kieslowski. So here you have a Caribbean writer who's very much part of that, working on two distinct but different, distinguished world filmmakers from Eastern Europe. So that's what I'm talking about is filmmakers who are coming, and for them, Truffaut or Ozu or Eisenstein or Kieslowski or David Lynch or whoever are all part of a kind of global archive of cinema.
Absolutely true. And there are a number of ways of looking at this phenomenon and how it can produce a movie like the film that we just saw, right, for example. But the Brazilian director, Carlos Diegues, said to me many years ago when I was interviewing him, every country in the world, and he's being a little bit too broad here, but every country in the world has two national cinemas, its own and Hollywood. And of course that means to some extent, absolutely, the movies that you literally see in the theaters, right, around the world, but it also means what you were referring to, the Hollywood classical style, which has become such a norm, even if it's deviated from, to some extent, in one case or another, norm around the world. We can also, though, I think, look at this phenomenon of the kind of global film archive, which has only expanded in the past 20 years or so, right, since video has been around for us, because now, at least theoretically, pretty much anybody with a serious interest in film, pretty much anywhere in the world, can get a hold of pretty much, certainly not every film, but films at least by the major, most influential filmmakers from pretty much any point in film history, and now you can even do it on the internet.
Exactly. No. I mean, we won't endorse anybody here, but you can go to an x.com and you can actually do searches for this kind of thing, and you can, use that secured line and bingo, order up film history in that way. And we know that sense of access, as the digital revolution continues, that sense of access will continue, because eventually, and I don't mean to be a futurologist here, but there will be possibilities, just as now people are being able to download full CDs of things, people will be able to download full sets of images and access the archive in that kind of way.
No question about it. And when I was young and in college and getting seriously interested in film for the first time, one of the great influences on me was the French New Wave. And I would go off to revival theaters, as we used to call them, right, in the city of Boston where I was living, and I would see all these films by Truffaut and Godard and Chabrol and so forth. And that was a long time ago. Nowadays, someone like the director of Cross My Heart and Hope to Die can, perhaps there is no revival theater in his city in Norway, but he can, one way or another, get a hold of exactly those same movies and be influenced by them in exactly the same kinds of way, perhaps.
Right.
So I'm just saying that we truly do, in that way, live in a postmodern time where old notions of availability, right, either in terms of time or space, have just become so much more flexible and so much less rigid than they used to be.
Well, I think this also brings up an issue for the other end of the process that makes up filmmaking. That is, at the end we've just been talking about directors can go to this kind of global archive. One of the issues we have at the other end of distribution and exhibition is that it is true that some of the doors of the revival houses and of the larger chains of art cinemas have really closed in recent years. So it is not-for-profit venues like the Museum of Modern Art or the Walter Reed Theater here in New York, or others we could name, who take over that mantle largely. And then obviously we hope a show like this does it as well. But that really is not quite the same. We all have, I think, a sense of regret about it. It's not really quite the same as getting out and getting down to that theater and being able to see something like this film on a larger screen, and for it to get the kind of publicity that's always associated with theatrical distribution.
Oh, no question about it. All of these things have upsides and downsides. Of course, I mean, you know, the great classic commentator on this was Walter Benjamin in the work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, but it is true that to what extent the movies ever had any kind of aura about them,
right.
Because at least we had to go to their house to see them. Movies have been on TV forever, but that was never taken seriously back in the old days when they were cut up by commercials and this and that. Nowadays, when we can just get them and pick them up and hold them in our hand and use them to hold the door open and stuff like that on video cassettes, they probably have less of an aura than ever. Right. And yet, the other side of it is that they are so much more available and we can get to them so much more easily now. One of the ironic things that I'm finding in teaching, and I'm sure that you may be, and I know that many of my colleagues are, is that as much as we believe in seeing movies on film and projected on a screen, on real celluloid, the way they were meant to be seen, nowadays, and this is very unfortunate, and this is partly because of video, print libraries are not being maintained the way they used to be. And so you may be able to get movie X in a film print, and yet you may choose to show it on video because it's just going to be not so beat up and falling apart.
Gosh darn better looking. Hard to think about. Let's talk about this now. Let's switch over to our specific film at hand, because I think there are a lot of ways in which this film illustrates the points about it partaking of an international set of traditions. I mean, we can recognize this clearly in a long line of coming of age films, and yet the film really does have a number of features that are certainly Norwegian, and also in a number of ways are pan-Scandinavian, because you can interchange certain features of the portrait of the society. What do you like about this film as a coming-of-age film, and what links it with other films like that you admire?
Well, there certainly is a global tradition of the coming-of-age story, and specifically the coming-of-age film. It seems to be something that European filmmakers in particular never get tired of, and I think we can go to, well, I know we can go to many different countries in Europe and find many examples of this kind of film. When we turn directly to the Scandinavian part of Europe, again, there does seem to be a very strong interest in this kind of story, and some of these movies have become very famous. My Life as a Dog is surely the best-known film of its kind, and Lasse Hallström, the director whose career was launched by that film, now has become a pretty important Hollywood director. His movie, The Cider House Rules, will probably be one of the more talked about movies of late 1999. And there are certainly other examples, movies like Twist and Shout, and there was another film, the title of which I can't remember at the moment, by the same director that also dealt with coming of age and so
by Billy August.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, in any case, there's a lot of interest in that in the Scandinavian part of Europe in particular. So it's the kind of story, I think, that allows any kind of an artist, and in this case a filmmaking artist, to at once tap into concerns that are found everywhere, and most people who make feature films are hoping that they will be shown in many countries of the world. So this is it's one of many kinds of stories, but it's certainly one of the kinds of stories that you know there will be an audience for it practically everywhere. People will recognize these situations, and yet at the same time, it does allow you to be to throw in a lot of local color. You know, to be particularized and to talk about some of the things that are particular to your country, to your city, to your neighborhood.
Right. No, I think certainly in the visual style of this film, I mean, the mise en scène were unmistakably, you know, in a northern, a Nordic country. One of the things that interests me is that this is a film not set in the middle class, because these are countries famous for the the near total mapping of the society by a kind of leveling of social classes. And this is a film that talks really about a lot of conflicts that come out of falling down the class ladder, as well as staying further down on the class ladder, being, as we would say, being from the wrong side of the tracks, and that is almost initially makes it a different kind of film, because it's taking a marginalized segment of the society. It's not taking a majority position. It's taking, what does it mean to have grown up in this way, where the film begins with the boys wanting to pee on the people that live near them, but live in the villas, as they are called.
Absolutely. I mean, you raise very important and interesting points about this film. I think when we think certainly when we think of Scandinavia generally, we think of a part of the world which different ways in different countries, but there's been exactly what you said, this effort to have an egalitarian society, and to one extent or another, by one means or another. And a lot of the most towering Scandinavian film artists, the most obvious example being Ingmar Bergman in Sweden, have gone their own kind of way. They've explored psychological issues. They've explored the interior life to a very large extent, without particularly getting involved in social issues a whole lot. And yet here is a film which reminds us that that social issues are just as relevant there as anywhere else. It's not only a film about people who perhaps live on what we might call the wrong side of the tracks, but who don't show any particular ambition to go anywhere else. They have, like most people, most places, I suppose, they have a certain kind of a life. There are things they like about it. There are things they don't like about it. But we don't see them voting or discussing governmental issues or pondering works of philosophy or even thinking how they might kind of raise themselves up to the next level. They're very, very busy living their lives, dealing with the emotional issues that are dominant at this or that moment in their daily lives. And I think it's very interesting that we have a movie which zeroes in so directly on that sort of thing coming from that part of Europe.
Just to give a little bit of evidence for what I agree about, we have things like the fact that even when the father comes home, he complains about the destruction of his apartment because he wants it. Now, certainly there's the motivation of him being crippled, etc. But there's also the fact is, no, he wants things the way they are constantly. We have the indication the child asks, how about your friends? And of course, we understand that this is a family that is withdrawn in certain kinds of ways. And then we also have revealed, as the film incrementally reveals backstory, the fact is that it's highly likely that Mother has come from a station above the one they live in. She has been a middle-class girl given extraordinary piano lessons with some talent, who, as is finally revealed in the film, who has had this, who's had a child out of wedlock as a young woman, and that has in some sense broken her life, and she has reestablished it with the family that we see to begin with. But she has, encircled herself in this family unit so as to keep out all of those other issues that, show up, and we don't know. At first, we don't really even know what they are when Frank shows up. He is the stranger in town, as it were, who seems to show up, the dark figure. What is he doing here? Why is he that? And he shows up at exactly this kind of special moment when school is out. Is he there just to get him in trouble? All of that left quite open for a large segment of the narrative.
Absolutely. Yes, and it is very interesting how the movie positions itself very much from the point of view of the young protagonist. We don't have all sorts of information which we then see him acquiring. We don't watch in all of our great maturity, which I only wish I had, and watch this young man sort of begin to catch up with us grown-ups. We are just as puzzled and just as bewildered as he is through whole large portions of the movie. It's so interesting, this issue of whether the characters are that driven to even change their lives or improve their lives or change their social status. The end of the movie is so interesting, I think, in that regard. It reminds me of more than one film, the end of the movie. The very, very end, when the young boy has his chance to play in the game and doesn't take it. Walks away from it. Clearly, even in terms of visual style, it's very close to Francois Truffaut's great classic, The 400 Blows. It's a different kind of a situation, but we have the same sort of lateral tracking shot of the boy. And in this case, though, at the end of The 400 Blows, the boy comes and approaches back toward the camera, which then moves in for a close-up and a freeze frame, back when such things were virtually unheard of. It was just an ending to knock you out of your chair back in 1959 and around that time, before freeze frames become such a cliche. But he approached us, and the end of the film was the young boy confronting us with his puzzlement, his anguish, his bewilderment at the world and his place in it, and giving us no answers at all, and challenging us to, as we might now say, feel his pain, and to share the great bewilderment and anxiety that came from this. And here, in this film, we have something very similar happens, but then he walks away from the camera. He doesn't walk toward it, he walks away from us, and he seems quite happy about the whole thing. He's going off to have more adventures. He's not just going to fit into the establishment. And that's one interesting parallel. And the other one, and then I think that these will sort of dovetail, is with a film you don't hear much about anymore, but it's another movie from roughly 1960, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner.
Oh, indeed, Tom Courtenay.
Great British film by Tony Richardson. And at the end of that, we have the young man finally having a chance of winning the race that has been a sort of a metaphor through the movie. And a totally different kind of young man. He's older than the character of this movie, and he's in prison and this and that. But he just stops running because he realizes, why would anybody try to do anything? And it's a very, very bitter and disillusioned ending. So if Truffaut gives us the kind of existential bewilderment, and Tony Richardson gives us the kind of bitter antisocial venom, this movie gives us something in its own way much more upbeat. The boy is making a choice that he is going to have certain kinds of adventures, and he is not necessarily going to try to elevate himself or change. He's just going to follow what seems to be the path he wants to follow in life, and that's okay with him.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, of course, one of the patterns we would probably look at in American film is that notion of being a team player as being, you know, a key metaphor of the culture, and we know the appropriation of sports metaphors into all kinds of American ways of talking about things. And so this would be the way, typically this would be the way in which he recognized the degree to which he had made errors in his relationship with society, and then he had reintegrated himself in that society, and then he would be joining in with others in that way. And I see this as joyful yet mixed, because, and that's one of the things that makes the ending so different, because it's an acceptance of family, it's an understanding who Frank is, what these tensions have meant, perhaps making that bond, trying to mend that first instead of what society officially endorses, because Frank is himself an outsider, and maybe they can make this kind of relationship. They're walking away, absolutely. Yet at the same time, there's the question of, are they walking away to something that really won't work out? Because
no question about that. And in that way, of course, it's a very modern film, by which I don't mean of 1999. I mean maybe of the past 30 years or something. But it certainly is, because we do not now have automatically walking off metaphorically into the sunset does not automatically connote and they lived happily ever after. It means and they got through the last shot of the movie, but who knows what's going to come next.
Exactly. Now, one of the things that I think is very interesting about the film that leads out of one of your comments, the way that this is a film focused through the experience, and you know, no, it's not first-person camera or whatever, but this is a film that is, I would say, in its visual texture, it's unstable in a certain kind of way, because it has this fevered intensity of his adolescent experience. So it means that we're experiencing the world in the way in which he's experiencing the world. And for me, at least, that is the chief motivation of the film's style. Of, among other things, the way in which this is a director who's really playing with color. This is not a lush Scandinavian summer, and they are lush Scandinavian summers. He keeps us in the industrial section of town with the brick housing. We don't see the lovely parks that really are a function of most Scandinavian cities, and certainly glorious in the summer. No Elvira Madigan in the middle of the summer, is this. But I also think it is connected with other ways we experience the scenes. Do you, what do you think about that hypothesis?
Oh, I absolutely agree with you, and I think it's both important to the film in the way that you specified, and the whole notion of the visual style being kind of flat. By flat I don't mean uninventive, I just mean what you said, that it doesn't reach out and engage the eye or make us think, well gee, I wish I were there to share the interesting lives of these people or something. Not just in terms of story, but in terms of style. Also, in terms of the film's narrative structure, talk about the 400 blows. This is a movie where we see the blows. This is, in many ways, this is a movie about people getting hit and hurt. There is one injury after another, and not only metaphorical injuries, not only psychological injuries, but real injuries, but real physical injuries, one after another. And I think everything sort of conspires to make the narrative world that the movie constructs, in terms of the story and in terms of the images, to be a rather daunting and unpleasant place, while at the same time letting us see and feel how people could in fact live there and just feel, well, this is the way life is. I haven't been singled out for a particular torment. Life is tough. Life is very difficult. And sometimes people take it in stride, as the father does for a while after his paralysis. And sometimes people go completely berserk, as the father also does after his paralysis. Sometimes people kill themselves, like the mysterious young woman who's found drowned at the beginning. Sometimes people make weird sorts of psychological adjustments, like more than one character that seems to allow them a certain measure of self-delusion that gets. There's a whole range of responses that we have, but what we interestingly see are people getting hurt a lot and people coping a lot.
Absolutely the case. Now this is one of the, and it's going to have to be one of our last topics, which is actually the handling of violence. This is a film that actually has a rather small cast to it, and one of the things about the film is that violence is individualized. That is, we are not allowed for violence just to be something, 10 more minutes, time for a shootout, or somebody's going to beat somebody up. It's always psychologically linked to a situation, but it's also mysterious, and the film also creates a deep sense of wounding about it, and of consequence, and that people have to live with the consequences of this kind of violence. Even when we have the terrible scene of the father poking himself, just to show that he can feel no more. But the fact that he feels no more makes us feel even more about him in that way. We've got just about a minute left, David. Is there anything else you'd like to point out that you think is one of the virtues of this film that people should be paying attention to?
Sure. I think that we should all be paying attention to the fact that in a country like Norway, which certainly has a film industry, it's still very far from Hollywood. There's not an enormous amount of resources to draw on there by the standards of the larger Western and European countries that have had long-standing major film industries. And yet, and I'm not saying this is totally out in the boondocks either. Obviously, Norway is an important and major nation. However, even in a film industry, which does not provide the kind of resources that we'd find in a lot of other places, a really solid, well-acted, well-filmed, and not just competently done, but expressively done and engagingly done movie like this can get made and is no big deal. It's not the movie of the decade for Norway. And if only on the reception end of things, movies like this could reach out to even more people. And it's wonderful we have City Cinematheque to give at least some Americans a look at it, because there's so much cinema like this being done and it needs more attention.
Thank you. If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque, drop us a line. Drop it to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Let me give you that address again. Drop us a note to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York 10016. David, I want to thank you for always joining us here with many an interesting analytical comment and with an extraordinarily broad knowledge of this global archive of cinema. It'll always be a pleasure to have you back on City Cinematheque.
Thanks for having me.
Great. And I hope you that tune in once again on City Cinematheque and you've enjoyed joining us today. Thanks a lot. The preceding episode of City Cinematheque was made possible, in part, by support from the American Scandinavian Foundation and the Norwegian Information Service in the United States.